I still remember the crisp air of the Alps and the way the ancient stones of the monastery seemed to radiate cold, even under the summer sun. The brochure promised charm, history, and breathtaking views. For an amateur photographer like me, it was irresistible. The locals' warnings about the monastery's dark past only added to its allure. I dismissed their tales of cursed monks and forbidden rituals as superstitious nonsense. The monastery-turned-hostel was nestled deep in a secluded valley, far from any town or village. Its towering stone walls, covered in creeping ivy, seemed to stretch endlessly upward, their shadows stretching long and ominous as the sun dipped behind the mountains. The caretaker, a wiry old man with a thick accent and darting eyes, handed me a tarnished brass key and mumbled something about locking my door at night. Inside, the monastery felt ancient in a way that no renovation could hide. The air was thick, damp, and carried a faint metallic tang. My room was small, sparsely furnished, and dominated by a narrow bed with an ornately carved wooden headboard. The carvings depicted scenes of angels and demons locked in battle, their faces worn smooth by time. That evening, as I explored the dimly lit corridors, I stumbled across another guest. She was standing in one of the empty halls, her long black hair spilling over her shoulders like a curtain. Her clothes were modern but nondescript, and she held a leather-bound notebook close to her chest. She didn't acknowledge me at first, but when our eyes met, I felt a chill race down my spine. Her irises seemed darker than they should have been, almost black. She didn't speak much, only offered a nod and a faint, cryptic smile. I watched as she sat cross-legged on a cold stone floor and began scribbling in her notebook. Her hand moved with a frantic energy, and I noticed strange, angular symbols filling the pages. I wanted to ask her what she was doing, but found myself unnerved by her intensity. Later that night, I lay in bed, staring at the flickering shadows cast by the single candle on the nightstand. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by fleeting dreams of dark corridors and chanting voices. When I woke, it wasn't a silence but to a low, rhythmic hum. It took me a moment to realize it was coming from my room. I turned my head slowly, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it might burst. There she was, crouched by my bedside, her face inches from mine. Her lips moved rapidly, forming words in a language I couldn't understand. Her eyes glowed faintly red in the darkness, and her hands were pressed against my arm. I froze, unable to move, unable to scream. She muttered faster and faster, and I felt a searing pain on my skin. I glanced down to see those same angular symbols now etched into my arm, their lines glowing faintly like molten metal. The moment I gasped, she stopped and rose abruptly, vanishing into the shadows without a sound. I didn't waste a second. Grabbing my camera and backpack, I bolted from the room and ran to the labyrinthine halls, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. But the monastery seemed different now, as if the walls had shifted. Corridors that had been straight now twisted, leading me in circles. The chanting grew louder, though I couldn't tell where it was coming from. Finally, I found a large mirror hanging in one of the halls. My reflection was there, but it wasn't moving the way it should. I raised my arm, but the figure in the mirror stayed still, its eyes wide and panicked. And then, behind me in the reflection, she appeared. She was smiling, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, her lips moving soundlessly. My reflection began to mimic her, mouthing words I couldn't hear. I turned, but there was no one there. The mirror cracked suddenly, splintering outward as if struck from the inside. Shards rained down, and I stumbled back, feeling the icy grip of fear clawing at my chest. The air felt heavier, like it was pressing down on me, squeezing the breath from my lungs. Somehow, I found my way to the entrance, the massive wooden door standing ajar. Outside, the night was eerily silent, the mountains looming like dark sentinels. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing on the damp ground. But the nightmare didn't end. The next day, I realized something was horribly wrong. People looked through me as if I wasn't there. My phone's camera refused to capture my image, and mirrors reflected nothing but empty air where I stood. Worse, I couldn't leave the valley. Every path I took led me back to the monastery, no matter how far I walked. It was as if I had become part of the place, bound to it like a moth trapped in amber. Eventually, I returned to the monastery, drawn back by a force I couldn't resist. She was waiting for me, standing in the main hall with that same faint, unsettling smile. She whispered that her ritual had succeeded, that my soul was now hers to keep. I tried to fight, tried to scream, but my voice made no sound. My body no longer felt like my own. I became a shadow, a ghost tied to the cursed stones of the monastery, doomed to wander at halls. Now, when travelers come, I try to warn them. I whisper through cracks in walls, scratch messages into the dust on the floors, and flicker lights to get their attention. But she always finds them first, and one by one they join me. As a spiritual retreat enthusiast, I often sought solace in places far removed from the chaos of daily life. When I heard whispers of an ancient monastery nestled deep within the Himalayan mountains, a sanctuary untouched by time, I knew I had to go. The idea of meditating amid serene silence, with only the whispers of the wind and the occasional rustle of nature as my company, was irresistible. The journey was grueling. Narrow paths wound treacherously along cliffs, and the air grew thin as I ascended higher into the mountains. My guide, a stoic man named Tenzin, spoke little, but his occasional glances toward the monastery carried an air of unease. When we finally reached it, I understood why. The monastery loomed before me, ancient and imposing, its once pristine walls weathered by centuries of wind and snow. Despite its dilapidated state, the structure exuded an almost magnetic pull. The monks, clad in simple robes, greeted me warmly but with reserved demeanor. Their faces were serene yet inscrutable, their smiles failing to reach their eyes. They led me to my chamber, a modest room with a single wooden bed and a window overlooking an abyss shrouded in perpetual mist. The first few days passed uneventfully. I joined the monks in their daily meditations, their chants resonating with a haunting beauty that seemed to echo through the mountains. Yet, there was something unsettling about the silence that enveloped the monastery. It wasn't the calming quiet I had anticipated. It was a dense, oppressive stillness, as though the air itself was holding its breath. One night, I awoke to faint murmurs. At first, I thought it was the wind, but as I listened closely, I realized the sound was rhythmic, almost chant-like. Curiosity got the better of me. Wrapping a shawl around my shoulders, I stepped out of my room and into the dimly lit corridor. The cold stone floor sent shivers up my spine as I made my way toward the source of the sound. The murmurs grew louder as I descended the creaky staircase. At the base, I hesitated. The chanting was coming from the courtyard. Peering through a crack in a heavy wooden door, I saw them. Figures clad in crimson robes, their faces obscured by hoods, gathered in a circle around an ancient, grotesque idol. The idol, carved from black stone, depicted a twisted, demonic figure with elongated limbs and hollow eyes that seemed to stare directly at me. The air was thick with the scent of burning herbs, their pungent aroma making my head spin. The chanting grew louder, more fervent, as if the ritualists were summoning something from the depths of the abyss. My pulse quickened. This was no ordinary meditation. As I watched, transfixed and horrified, one of the figures turned toward me. It was Brother Lamo, the monk who had been the most welcoming upon my arrival. But now, his eyes glowed with an unnatural red light, and his face twisted into a malevolent grin. He raised a hand and beckoned me forward. "Join us," he whispered, his voice echoing unnaturally, "or be consumed." Panic surged through me. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. But before I could flee, the ritualists rushed toward me, their movements unnaturally fast and fluid. They pinned me down, their hands cold and unyielding as iron. One of them pressed a cloth to my face, soaked in something sharp and herbal. The scent overwhelmed me, and dizziness clouded my vision. I fought desperately, adrenaline surging through my veins. Summoning every ounce of strength, I broke free, grabbing a nearby candle from its holder. Without thinking, I swung it wildly, the flame catching the edge of one of their robes. The fire spread quickly, consuming the fabric and igniting a chain reaction among the ritualists. The courtyard erupted into chaos. The figures screamed in an unearthly chorus as flames danced across the crimson robes. The idol itself seemed to tremble, its hollow eyes glowing brighter as cracks began to form along its surface. The ground beneath me shook violently, and I realized with dawning horror that the monastery was beginning to collapse. I ran. The walls around me crumbled, ancient stones falling into the abyss below. The air was filled with smoke and the deafening roar of destruction. Somehow, I made it out, stumbling into the cold night as the monastery sank into mist, taking the ritualists and their cursed idol with it. Hours later, as the first rays of dawn broke through the clouds, I found myself in a nearby village. The locals listened to my story with grim expressions. An elderly man finally spoke, his voice heavy with sorrow. "That monastery has been abandoned for decades," he said. "The monks left long ago, driven out by darker forces. You are lucky to be alive." I nodded numbly, the weight of his words sinking in. As I looked back toward the mountains, now obscured by the rising sun, I felt no peace, only a lingering sense of dread. The monastery was gone, but its shadow would haunt me forever.